Did you hear that? Naomi Carter whispered to herself, though there was no one in the kitchen to answer her. The mansion was supposed to be empty this late at night, the kind of quiet that wealthy homes carried after midnight when the staff had gone and the owners were somewhere else in the world making deals under brighter lights. Naomi stood in the vast Whitmore estate kitchen with a damp cloth in her hand, slowly wiping the polished marble counter that probably cost more than her entire apartment back in Durham, North Carolina. The refrigerator hummed softly, the grandfather clock down the hall ticked in steady rhythm, and rain tapped against the tall windows overlooking the dark backyard. It was the kind of peaceful silence Naomi had grown used to during her late cleaning shifts. But then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. She froze, cloth still in her hand, her breath caught halfway in her chest. The sound had come from somewhere below her feet. At first she thought it was the pipes. Old houses made noises all the time, especially mansions like this one built nearly 100 years ago. The agency that hired her had warned her the Whitmore property creaked and settled in strange ways. Still, Naomi tilted her head and listened. 10 seconds passed. Nothing. She let out a quiet breath and shook her head, trying to laugh it off. Just the house talking, she murmured, returning to the counter. But as soon as she bent down to rinse the cloth in the sink, the sound came again. Tap, tap, tap. This time it was clearer, more deliberate, like someone knocking carefully on the underside of the floorboards. Naomi slowly straightened, her eyes scanning the kitchen as if the answer might suddenly appear between the stainless steel appliances and the towering cabinets. The Whitmore estate was enormous, nearly 12,000 square feet according to the real estate article she had once looked up on her phone out of curiosity. 3 stories above ground. Wine cellar. Indoor gym. Private theater. But there was one thing about the house that everyone in town knew. The owner, Alexander Whitmore, the billionaire founder of Whitmore Technologies, had disappeared 6 months earlier. The news channels had talked about it for weeks. Helicopters over the estate. Reporters at the gates. Speculation about business rivals and corporate secrets. Eventually the story faded, replaced by something newer and louder. The company had moved on. His son Ethan Whitmore had taken over as acting CEO. Life went forward. But Naomi had always thought it was strange that a man that powerful could vanish without a trace. And now she was standing alone in his kitchen at 1 a.m, listening to something knocking from somewhere beneath the floor. She stepped carefully across the marble tiles, her sneakers barely making a sound. Tap, tap, tap. The noise came again, faint but unmistakable. Naomi looked down at the floor near the far wall where the kitchen met the dining room. Her pulse began to beat a little faster, not with panic, but with a growing, uneasy curiosity. Okay, that's definitely not pipes, she said quietly. She crouched down and pressed her palm against the cool tile. For a moment there was nothing. Then, directly beneath her hand, the floor answered back. Tap, tap, tap. Naomi slowly pulled her hand away as a chill crept up her spine. Someone was down there. Naomi Carter stayed crouched on the marble floor for several seconds, her eyes fixed on the spot where the faint knocking had answered her touch. The kitchen lights above cast a soft yellow glow across the polished tiles, reflecting the tall windows and the dark shape of the backyard beyond them. For a moment, she wondered if her mind was playing tricks on her. It had been a long shift. She had started cleaning at 8 p.m, and it was already past 1 a.m. Sometimes exhaustion could make ordinary sounds feel strange. Still, she placed her hand on the floor again, this time pressing a little harder as if she could feel through the stone itself. The marble was cool and perfectly smooth, but the silence underneath it felt heavy, like a room that had been closed for too long. Naomi waited. The clock in the hallway ticked again. Then, slowly, almost cautiously, the sound returned. Tap, tap, tap. Her breath caught. It was not random. It was a pattern, 3 deliberate knocks spaced a second apart. Naomi pulled her hand back and sat on her heels, staring down at the tile. Whoever was below had answered her. A strange feeling settled in her chest, something between curiosity and unease. She looked around the kitchen as if expecting someone else to appear and explain everything, but the house remained empty. Ethan Whitmore had left earlier that afternoon, according to the driver, who sometimes waited by the gate. The rest of the staff worked daytime hours. Naomi was the only one scheduled for overnight cleaning this week. She stood slowly and walked across the kitchen toward the dining room entrance, glancing back at the spot on the floor as if it might move. The Whitmore mansion was full of stories. Every local contractor and cleaning service in Mecklenburg County seemed to know at least one rumor about the place. Some said the basement was larger than the rest of the house combined. Others claimed parts of the estate had been sealed off decades ago during renovations. Naomi had never paid much attention to those stories before. To her, the job had simply meant steady paychecks and quiet nights. But now those rumors crept back into her mind as she looked down the long hallway leading deeper into the house. She walked back to the tile and gently tapped the floor 3 times with her knuckles. The response came almost instantly. Tap, tap, tap. Naomi felt a chill run across her arms. There was no mistaking it anymore. Someone was definitely below the kitchen floor. She stood there for a long moment, trying to think clearly. If someone truly was trapped under the house, calling for help in the middle of the night, then this was no ordinary situation. But where was the entrance? Most houses this size had a visible basement door or a staircase somewhere near the back corridor. She had cleaned nearly every room on the first floor over the past 3 weeks and had never seen anything like that. Her eyes slowly moved across the far wall of the kitchen where an elegant wine cabinet stretched from floor to ceiling. Hundreds of bottles rested behind glass panels lit by small golden lights. It was beautiful and expensive, exactly the kind of thing a billionaire might display for guests. Naomi stared at it for a moment, then looked back at the tile where the knocking had come from. The cabinet stood directly above that part of the floor. Another thought formed quietly in her mind, one that made her heart begin to beat a little faster. Some doors were not meant to be obvious, and if someone had hidden a room beneath this house, the entrance would probably be hidden too. Naomi Carter stood motionless in the quiet kitchen, her eyes fixed on the tall wine cabinet across the room as the thought slowly settled into place in her mind. The knocking beneath the marble floor had not stopped entirely. It came now and then, patient and cautious, as if whoever was below understood that sound carried easily through an empty house at night. Tap, tap, tap. Naomi took a slow breath and walked toward the cabinet, each step careful on the polished tile. The rows of wine bottles shimmered behind the glass panels under the soft golden lights built into the shelving. Some of the labels looked older than she was, imported from France and Italy, the kind of collection that belonged in magazines about luxury living. Naomi was not thinking about wine, though. She was looking at the cabinet itself. The structure stretched nearly 8 feet high and several feet wide, built into the wall like a permanent fixture of the kitchen. But the more she studied it, the more something felt slightly wrong. The marble floor ended directly beneath the cabinet with no visible seam or base molding connecting it to the wall. It looked less like furniture and more like something installed after the house had already been built. Naomi reached out and placed her hand gently against the wooden frame. The surface was cool and solid, but when she pressed lightly, she felt the faintest movement, almost like the cabinet had more give than it should. Her pulse quickened a little. Okay, she whispered softly, mostly to steady herself. Let us think this through. She glanced back toward the spot on the floor where the knocking had first reached her. If someone was truly beneath the house, the entrance had to be somewhere nearby. Old estates often had hidden service corridors or storage cellars. Some even had concealed doors designed decades ago when homeowners liked secret passageways as a novelty. Naomi had seen documentaries about houses like that. But this was not a museum. This was a real place with a real sound coming from underneath it. She leaned closer to the cabinet and looked along the edges of the frame. At first, everything appeared perfectly aligned. The craftsmanship was so precise it almost looked carved from a single piece of wood. Then, she noticed something small near the lower right corner, a metal hinge partially hidden behind a row of wine bottles. Naomi blinked in surprise and leaned in farther. The hinge was not decorative. It was functional. The cabinet was not built into the wall at all. It was mounted like a door. Her heart began to beat faster now, not from fear, but from the sudden realization that she had been standing in front of the entrance this entire time. Naomi gently slid one of the bottles aside and touched the wooden panel beside it. The cabinet shifted slightly beneath her hand. Tap, tap, tap. The sound from below came again, faint but unmistakable, as if whoever was down there had heard the movement above and understood what it meant. Naomi swallowed slowly and wrapped her fingers around the edge of the frame. For a moment she hesitated, staring at the elegant cabinet that hid something far stranger than a wine cellar. Then she pulled. The entire wall of bottles swung outward with a quiet creak, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness beneath the house. Naomi Carter held the edge of the hidden cabinet door as it slowly swung open, the soft creak of its hinges echoing faintly through the quiet kitchen. Behind it, a narrow staircase revealed itself, descending steeply beneath the house into a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the light from the kitchen behind her. The air that rose from the opening felt cooler, carrying the faint scent of stone and dust that had been undisturbed for a long time. Naomi stood there for several seconds, her hand still gripping the wooden frame as she stared down the steps. The staircase was narrow, maybe 3 feet wide, built from old concrete that looked worn smooth from years of use. A metal handrail ran along one side, disappearing into the shadows below. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came again, clearer now that the door was open. It echoed faintly upward from somewhere deep below the stairs. Naomi felt the hair on her arms rise slightly. Whoever was down there knew the door had opened. She looked back across the empty kitchen for a moment, as if expecting someone to walk in and tell her to stop. But the house remained silent. The rain outside continued to tap gently against the tall windows, and the grandfather clock down the hallway kept its steady rhythm. Naomi turned back toward the staircase. "Hello," she called softly, her voice carrying down into the darkness. For a moment there was no answer. The silence stretched long enough that she wondered if the person below had not heard her. Then a faint voice drifted upward, weak but unmistakably human. "Is someone there?" Naomi felt her chest tighten with surprise. The voice sounded hoarse, as though it had not been used much recently. "Yes," she answered quickly, stepping a little closer to the opening. "I am upstairs in the kitchen. Are you okay down there?" A few seconds passed before the voice replied again. "Do not close the door." The words came slowly, each one careful and measured. Naomi glanced down the staircase again. The darkness below made it impossible to see more than a few steps. There were no lights along the walls, no switches nearby that she could find. She reached into the pocket of her cleaning apron and pulled out her phone, tapping the screen to turn on the flashlight. A narrow beam of white light cut through the darkness, revealing the concrete steps descending deeper under the house. Naomi hesitated for a moment. She had come here expecting to clean countertops and sweep floors, not to discover hidden staircases beneath a billionaire's mansion. But the voice below sounded real and fragile, and leaving now felt impossible. She stepped carefully onto the first stair. The cool concrete pressed through the thin soles of her sneakers as she slowly made her way downward. The light from her phone illuminated the walls as she moved, revealing old stone blocks and pipes running along the ceiling overhead. The staircase turned slightly halfway down, making the bottom impossible to see from above. Naomi descended slowly, one step at a time, her heart beating faster with every foot she moved deeper under the house. "I am coming down," she called softly so the voice would know she was not leaving. There was a pause, then the faint reply came again from the shadows ahead. "Please hurry." Naomi reached the bottom of the staircase and turned the corner, raising her phone to shine the light forward. The beam revealed a small concrete room beneath the mansion, simple and windowless, and in the center of that quiet underground space sat a man who looked up toward the light as if he had been waiting for it. Naomi Carter lowered her phone slightly as the beam of light settled on the man sitting in the center of the small concrete room. For a moment neither of them spoke. The silence felt heavy, filled with the quiet hum of pipes running somewhere behind the walls of the house above them. The man slowly lifted a hand to shield his eyes from the brightness of the flashlight. His movements were careful and unhurried, like someone adjusting to light after spending a long time in darkness. Naomi stepped a little closer, trying to see him more clearly. He looked to be in his early 50s, with silver threaded through dark hair that had grown unevenly around his temples. His clothes were simple, a gray sweater and dark pants that looked worn but clean. There was a small folding cot against the far wall and a metal table beside it with a half-empty bottle of water resting on top. The room itself was plain and quiet. No decorations, no windows, just smooth concrete walls and a low ceiling with a single exposed pipe running across it. Naomi felt her heart beat faster, not with fear, but with confusion. This did not look like a place someone would live by choice. Yet the man did not appear frightened either. He simply watched her with a steady expression as if he had been expecting this moment for a long time. "You heard the knocking," he said slowly. His voice was still rough, but clearer now that she was closer. Naomi nodded. "Yes. I was cleaning the kitchen upstairs, and I heard it through the floor." She hesitated before asking the question that had already formed in her mind. "Are you trapped down here?" The man studied her for a moment before answering. His eyes moved briefly to the staircase behind her, then back to her face. "That depends on how you look at it," he said quietly. Naomi frowned slightly, unsure what that meant. She lifted the phone a little higher, letting the light spread across the room. The man pushed himself gently to his feet. He moved carefully, but without struggle, brushing a bit of dust from his sleeve as he stood. Up close, Naomi could see the tired lines around his eyes, but there was something else there too, something calm and deliberate. "What is your name?" he asked. Naomi blinked, surprised by the question. "Naomi Carter," she replied. "I work for the cleaning service that comes at night." The man nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already suspected. Then he took a small step forward into the light. Naomi studied his face more carefully now, and a strange feeling began to settle in her chest. She had seen that face somewhere before. Not in person, but on screens and in photographs. News channels, business magazines, articles that sometimes appeared on the television in the break room of the cleaning company where she worked. Naomi felt her breath catch as recognition slowly formed. The man noticed the change in her expression and gave a faint, almost tired smile. "You recognize me," he said. Naomi lowered the phone a little, staring at him in disbelief. "You are Alexander Whitmore," she whispered. The man who had disappeared from every headline in America 6 months earlier looked back at her quietly and nodded once. "Yes," he said. "That is my name." Naomi stood frozen for a moment as the realization settled over her. The billionaire everyone believed had vanished without a trace was standing right in front of her beneath his own house. Naomi Carter stood in the dim underground room, holding her phone like a small lantern while the realization continued to settle over her mind. Alexander Whitmore watched her quietly, his posture calm but his eyes alert, as if he was measuring every reaction she had. Naomi tried to steady her breathing. She had seen his face on television screens many times. 6 months earlier, every news station in the country had talked about the sudden disappearance of the billionaire technology founder. Helicopters had circled this very property. Reporters had stood outside the iron gates asking questions that no one could answer. Eventually the story had faded and the world had moved on. Yet here he was standing beneath the same house where the search had once taken place. Naomi shook her head slowly, still trying to understand. "Everyone said you vanished," she said softly. "They said no one knew where you went." Alexander Whitmore gave a quiet exhale that almost sounded like a tired laugh. "Yes," he replied. "That is what the world believes." Naomi glanced around the concrete room again. The simple cot, the metal table, the low ceiling, and the bare walls. It felt impossible to connect this quiet underground space with the powerful man whose company buildings towered over cities across the country. "Why are you down here?" she asked carefully. Alexander did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to the small table and rested one hand lightly against it, as if collecting his thoughts. "Tell me something first," he said. "Is my son in the house tonight?" Naomi blinked, surprised by the question. "No," she answered. "Mr. Ethan Whitmore left earlier this afternoon. The driver said he was flying to New York for a meeting tomorrow." Alexander nodded slowly as if that information confirmed something he had expected. "Then we have a little time," he said quietly. Naomi felt the weight of his words. The calm tone in his voice carried something deeper beneath it, something that suggested the situation was far more complicated than she had first imagined. "Time for what?" she asked. Alexander looked directly at her now. The faint light from her phone reflected in his eyes. "Time for you to decide whether you are willing to listen," he said. Naomi frowned slightly. "Listen to what?" The man took a slow breath before answering. "The truth about why I am here." Naomi remained silent, waiting. The underground room felt even quieter now, the faint hum of pipes the only sound around them. After a moment, Alexander continued speaking. 6 months ago the world believed I disappeared, he said. But the truth is I did not disappear at all. Naomi felt a chill move through her shoulders. Then what happened? She asked. Alexander held her gaze steadily. Someone decided it would be better if I stayed out of sight. Naomi's mind raced through possibilities, but the one question that rose above the rest came out of her mouth before she could stop it. Who would do that? Alexander Whitmore did not look away as he answered. My son, he said quietly. Naomi Carter stared at Alexander Whitmore as his words settled heavily in the small underground room. For several seconds, she could not speak. The idea sounded impossible, like something from a movie rather than real life. Your son? She finally said, her voice quiet with disbelief. Alexander nodded once, not dramatically, just a small confirmation as if the truth had long since lost its shock for him. Naomi shook her head. Slowly. That does not make sense, she said. Mr. Ethan Whitmore runs the company now. He told reporters he had been searching for you. Alexander let out a slow breath and leaned lightly against the metal table behind him. The dim light from Naomi's phone reflected across the concrete walls as he spoke. Yes, he said. He has said many things over the past 6 months. Naomi felt her mind racing. She remembered seeing Ethan Whitmore on television once, standing in front of the company headquarters in Charlotte, speaking calmly to reporters about continuing his father's legacy. The man had looked confident, controlled, almost reassuring. Nothing about that moment suggested something like this hidden room existed beneath the same house. Naomi looked around again as if the walls themselves might explain it. If what you are saying is true, she said carefully, why would he keep you down here instead of simply telling people you retired or something like that? Alexander watched her thoughtfully. Because retirement would not give him control, he replied. Naomi frowned. Control of what? Alexander straightened slightly and folded his hands together as if organizing the explanation in his mind. My company is structured in a very specific way, he said. Most people assume that whoever becomes chief executive automatically controls everything. That is not how Whitmore Technologies was built. Naomi listened closely now. The quiet tension in the room made every word feel important. The majority of the voting power remains tied to me personally, Alexander continued. Even if I am absent, even if I disappear. Naomi slowly understood what he meant. So if people believe you are gone, she said, then the board eventually has to transfer that power, Alexander finished calmly. Naomi felt a cold realization forming. But if you are still alive, Alexander nodded again. Then legally the company still belongs to me. The underground room seemed even smaller now as the meaning of that statement settled between them. Naomi looked at the staircase behind her, then back at the man standing in front of her. You are saying he needed everyone to believe you were gone, she said quietly. Long enough for the company to become his. Alexander did not respond right away. Instead, he glanced briefly toward the ceiling where the quiet mansion stood above them. Power changes people, he said softly. Naomi felt a long silence stretch between them. Before she asked the question that now seemed unavoidable. Why are you telling me all of this? Alexander Whitmore looked back at her with steady eyes. Because you were the first person in 6 months who heard the knocking and chose to open the door. Naomi Carter remained standing near the bottom of the staircase, the faint light from her phone casting long shadows across the concrete floor as Alexander Whitmore's last words echoed quietly in the room. You were the first person in 6 months who heard the knocking and chose to open the door. Naomi felt the weight of that statement settle in her chest. She had not come to this house looking for anything unusual. She had simply been doing her job, wiping counters and mopping floors in a mansion that felt far too large for the quiet nights she worked alone. Yet somehow that ordinary shift had led her here, standing beneath the house with a man the entire country believed had vanished. She lowered the phone slightly, thinking carefully before speaking again. If you have been down here for 6 months, she said slowly, then someone has been bringing you food and water. Alexander gave a small nod. Yes, he replied. Naomi looked around the room again. The small bottle of water on the metal table, the folded blanket on the cot, the faint hum of the ventilation pipe running along the ceiling. The space was basic but clearly maintained. Who? She asked. Alexander paused for a moment before answering. The same person who made sure the door upstairs stayed closed, he said quietly. Naomi understood immediately. Your son. Alexander nodded once more. Naomi felt a mixture of confusion and disbelief rising again. If he wanted people to think you disappeared, she said, why keep you here instead of sending you somewhere far away? Alexander looked toward the staircase behind her, then back at Naomi. Because distance creates uncertainty, he explained. But proximity creates control. Naomi studied his face, realizing there was a quiet calculation behind everything he said. This was not a man guessing at possibilities. He had been thinking about this for months. He needed to know exactly where you were, she said softly. Alexander's eyes reflected the light from her phone again as he nodded. And he needed to know that I could not reach the outside world. Naomi's grip tightened slightly. Around the phone. But now you can, she said. The words hung in the air between them. Alexander Whitmore watched her carefully, as if measuring how much she had already understood. That depends, he said after a moment. Naomi frowned slightly. On what? Alexander's voice remained calm. On whether you choose to walk back upstairs and pretend you never found this door. Naomi felt a quiet tension fill the room again. The thought of simply closing the cabinet and returning to her cleaning supplies upstairs suddenly seemed impossible, yet the risk of getting involved in something this large felt equally real. She glanced toward the staircase, imagining the silent kitchen waiting above them. Then she looked back at Alexander Whitmore. You said we have time, she said slowly. What happens when your son comes back? Alexander held her gaze steadily. That, he replied, is exactly the problem we need to solve tonight. Naomi Carter felt the quiet weight of Alexander Whitmore's words settle into the underground room like the low hum of the pipes above them. The problem we need to solve tonight. She stood still for a moment, letting the thought sink in. Only an hour earlier she had been wiping fingerprints from glass cabinets and humming softly to herself in the empty kitchen. Now she was standing beneath the same house with a man the entire country believed had vanished. Naomi slowly lifted her phone again, letting the beam of light sweep gently across the walls as if searching for answers hidden in the concrete. If you want to leave, she said carefully, then we could just walk up the stairs right now. The suggestion hung between them for a moment. Alexander Whitmore did not move. Instead, he folded his arms loosely and studied the staircase behind her as though measuring the idea. If it were that simple, he said quietly, I would have walked out weeks ago. Naomi frowned slightly. What is stopping you? Alexander's eyes returned to her. Evidence, he replied. Naomi tilted her head, unsure what he meant. Alexander stepped closer to the small metal table and picked up the water bottle, turning it slowly in his hands. If I appear suddenly after 6 months without proof of what happened, the story becomes my word against my son's, he explained. Naomi listened closely. And he controls the company, she said. Alexander nodded. And most of the people around it. Naomi felt the pieces beginning to connect. So even if you walk out of here tonight, she said slowly, people might not believe you. Alexander gave a small, thoughtful smile. Exactly. The room fell quiet again as Naomi considered that. Outside the house, the world still believed a powerful businessman had vanished without explanation. Inside the house, the man himself was standing only 20 feet below the kitchen floor. But without proof, the truth might sound like a strange story rather than reality. Naomi shifted her weight slightly and looked toward the staircase again. Then we need something that proves you were here, she said. Alexander's expression changed slightly, a flicker of interest appearing in his eyes. Yes, he said. That is exactly what we need. Naomi thought for a moment, scanning the room again with the flashlight on her phone. Cameras, she said suddenly. Your house must have security cameras. Alexander nodded slowly. It does. Naomi felt a small spark of hope. Then they would have recorded someone opening the cabinet door and coming down here. Alexander's smile faded gently as he shook his head. Those cameras were replaced 2 months ago, he said. Naomi sighed quietly. Of course they had been. Whoever planned this had clearly thought through the details. The room grew still again before Naomi spoke once more. What about documents? She asked. Messages? Something he wrote. Alexander watched her carefully. You think like someone who solves problems, he said. Naomi shrugged slightly. I just do not like mysteries. Alexander took a slow breath before speaking again. There is something, he said. Naomi lifted the phone a little higher. What is it? Alexander looked toward the far wall of the room, where a narrow steel cabinet stood partially hidden in the shadows. When my son first brought me here, he said quietly, he made one mistake. Naomi followed his gaze toward the cabinet as curiosity returned to her voice. What kind of mistake? Alexander Whitmore looked back at her calmly. He left behind something he never expected anyone else to see. Naomi Carter followed Alexander Whitmore's gaze across the small underground room toward the steel cabinet standing against the far wall. The beam of light from her phone slid slowly across the metal surface, revealing a narrow storage unit that looked older than the rest of the room. It was about 5 feet tall with a simple handle on the front and a thin layer of dust along its edges. Naomi stepped closer, the soft echo of her sneakers against the concrete floor sounding louder in the quiet space. That cabinet? She asked quietly. Alexander nodded. Yes, he said. Naomi reached out and gently pulled the handle. The door opened with a low metallic creak, revealing several shelves inside. Most of them were empty except for a few ordinary items. A folded blanket, a small flashlight, a stack of paper cups. Naomi looked back at Alexander with a slightly puzzled expression. This does not look like evidence, she said. Alexander walked over and pointed toward the bottom shelf. Naomi angled the light downward. There, resting near the back corner, was a slim black folder. It looked out of place among the simple supplies, like something that belonged in an office rather than a hidden room beneath a house. Naomi crouched down and carefully picked it up. The folder felt heavier than it looked. Open it, Alexander said calmly. Naomi lifted the cover. Inside were several printed documents held together with a metal clip. The pages were filled with typed legal text, charts, and official-looking signatures at the bottom. Naomi flipped through them slowly, her eyes scanning the headings. One phrase appeared again and again near the top of the pages. Transfer of controlling shares. Naomi glanced up at Alexander. These are company documents, she said. Alexander nodded. Yes. Naomi turned another page. The date printed near the top made her pause. It was dated 5 months earlier, 1 month after the day the news had reported Alexander Whitmore's disappearance. Naomi continued reading, her eyes widening slightly as the meaning became clearer. The documents described a temporary legal restructuring of the company's ownership. If Alexander Whitmore were declared permanently missing, the majority voting control of Whitmore Technologies would be transferred to the acting chief executive officer, Ethan Whitmore. Naomi slowly looked up again. He was preparing to take the company, she said. Alexander gave a small nod. Yes. Naomi turned the page again and noticed something else this time. Near the bottom of the final document was a handwritten note in blue ink. The handwriting was quick and slightly slanted, as though someone had written it in a hurry. Naomi leaned closer to read it aloud. Finalized once the board confirms the absence is permanent. She stopped and looked back at Alexander. This is his writing? She asked. Alexander nodded once more. My son signed most of those documents himself. Naomi carefully closed the folder and held it in both hands. The quiet room seemed even more serious now. So this proves what he planned, she said. Alexander shook his head gently. It proves intent, he replied. Naomi frowned slightly. That is not enough. Alexander met her gaze steadily. Not if we want the world to believe the truth. Naomi looked down at the folder again, thinking quickly. Then what else do we need? She asked. Alexander Whitmore looked toward the staircase leading back to the silent mansion above them and spoke quietly. We need proof that I never left this house. Naomi Carter held the black folder carefully as the quiet words from Alexander Whitmore settled into the room. We need proof that I never left this house. She slowly looked from the documents in her hands back to the man standing in front of her. The beam from her phone light cast a soft glow across the concrete walls, and for a moment the underground room felt like the center of a puzzle slowly coming together. Naomi thought carefully before speaking. If you never left the house, she said slowly, then someone inside the house must have known you were here. Alexander nodded. Exactly. Naomi looked toward the staircase again, imagining the silent hallways and polished floors above them. The Whitmore estate was large, but it was not empty. Over the past few weeks, she had seen several staff members come and go during daytime hours. A driver, a groundskeeper, a house manager who handled deliveries. Naomi turned back toward Alexander. Then someone upstairs must have noticed something, she said. Alexander's expression remained calm, but thoughtful. Perhaps, he replied. Naomi frowned slightly. You do not sound very confident. Alexander gave a small, reflective smile. Because most people notice only what they expect to see, he said. Naomi understood what he meant. In a house this large, many doors remained closed simply because no one questioned them. Staff followed routines. Deliveries arrived. Rooms stayed locked. Few people would imagine a hidden staircase behind a wine cabinet leading to a room beneath the house. Naomi tapped the folder lightly against her palm while thinking. But there must be something that shows you. We're here, she said. Receipts. Supply orders. Something your son used to keep this room running. Alexander watched her with growing interest. You are thinking in the right direction, he said. Naomi paced slowly across the small space, the beam of light from her phone moving with her. If he brought food and water, she continued, then those supplies had to come from somewhere. Alexander nodded once more. Naomi turned toward the steel cabinet again and opened it wider, examining the shelves more closely this time. She moved aside the folded blanket, then lifted the stack of paper cups. Behind them, she noticed something she had missed earlier. A small cardboard box tucked into the corner of the bottom shelf. Naomi pulled it out and set it on the metal table. Alexander stepped closer as she opened the lid. Inside were several neatly folded grocery receipts. Naomi picked up the first one and read the store name printed at the top. A local market less than 3 miles from the Whitmore estate. She checked the date. 5 months ago. Then another receipt. 4 months ago. Then another from 3 weeks earlier. Naomi looked up slowly. These are recent, she said. Alexander nodded. My son does not personally shop for groceries, he said quietly. Naomi turned another receipt over in her hand, studying the details. Bottled water. Canned soup. Bread. Simple supplies that matched the items she had seen in the room. Naomi felt a new realization forming. Every purchase leaves a record, she said. Alexander's eyes brightened slightly. Yes, he replied. Naomi looked from the receipts back to the staircase leading upward, which means someone at that store saw whoever bought these. Alexander Whitmore met her gaze steadily and spoke in a calm voice. And that, he said, might be the witness we need. Naomi Carter held one of the grocery receipts between her fingers as the idea continued to grow in her mind. The small piece of paper felt strangely important now, like a thread that could unravel everything that had happened inside the Whitmore estate during the past 6 months. She placed the receipt carefully back on the table beside the others and looked toward Alexander Whitmore. If someone at that store remembers the purchases, she said slowly, then they might remember who made them. Alexander nodded. That is correct. Naomi glanced again at the printed store name. At the top of the receipt, the market was small and local, the kind of neighborhood grocery store where employees often recognized regular customers. How often did your son come down here? She asked. Alexander thought for a moment before answering. Usually once every few days, he said. Naomi studied the receipts again. The pattern matched what he described. Purchases spaced several days apart, always the same basic items. Water, bread, canned soup, simple food meant to last a few days at a time. Naomi folded her arms slightly as she considered the situation. Then the store might have security cameras too, she said. Alexander gave a quiet nod of approval. Yes, he replied. Naomi felt the pieces beginning to align. A witness from the store. Security footage showing who purchased the supplies. Receipts proving the dates matched the time Alexander had been missing. The story would no longer sound like an impossible accusation. It would become a timeline supported by records. Naomi looked toward the staircase again, imagining the dark kitchen waiting above them. But we cannot go to the store tonight, she said. It is already closed. Alexander agreed. Yes, he said calmly. Naomi looked back at the receipts on the table. Then the first step is protecting these. Alexander watched her carefully. You are thinking ahead, he said. Naomi shrugged slightly. Someone should. She gathered the receipts neatly into a small stack and slid them back into the cardboard box so they would not scatter. Then she picked up the black folder containing the legal documents as well. If your son comes back and realizes I found this room, she said quietly, he will remove anything that proves you were here. Alexander nodded slowly. That is likely. Naomi slipped the receipts into the folder and closed it firmly. Then they need to leave this house tonight, she said. Alexander studied her for a moment before speaking again. You are willing to take them? Naomi hesitated for only a second. The quiet room beneath the mansion suddenly felt less like a hidden prison and more like the center of a truth that had been buried too long. She thought about the months Alexander Whitmore had spent knocking quietly on the floor above him, hoping someone would hear. She thought about the ordinary night that had brought her here. Then she nodded. Yes, she said. Alexander Whitmore looked at her steadily, and for the first time since she had entered the room, there was a small hint of relief in his expression. Then tomorrow, he said calmly, we begin to bring the truth back upstairs. Naomi Carter climbed the narrow staircase slowly with the black folder pressed firmly against her side, and her phone lighting each step ahead of her. The quiet hum of the house above grew slightly louder as she neared the top, the distant ticking of the grandfather clock drifting faintly through the hidden doorway. Behind her, Alexander Whitmore remained standing in the underground room, watching calmly as she reached the final step. Naomi paused for a moment at the threshold, looking back down the stairs. The beam of light from her phone briefly illuminated his face again, and for the first time since she had met him, there was something different in his expression. It was not relief exactly, but something close to it, the quiet understanding that the truth he had been holding onto for months might finally reach the world above. I will come back tomorrow night, Naomi said quietly. Alexander nodded once. Be careful, he replied. Naomi gave a small nod in return before gently pulling the cabinet door closed behind her. The hidden wine shelf slid back into place with a soft click, leaving no sign that the staircase existed behind it. The kitchen looked exactly as it had an hour earlier, spotless marble counters reflecting the warm overhead lights and rows of glass bottles glowing softly along the wall. Yet everything felt different now. Naomi stood still for a moment, listening. The house was silent. She slipped the black folder into the canvas cleaning bag she had left near the sink, making sure the documents and receipts were tucked safely between the folded towels. Then she finished wiping the last section of countertop with steady movements, forcing her hands to follow the routine she performed every night. Anyone watching would see nothing unusual, just a cleaning worker completing a late shift in a quiet mansion. When she finally turned off the kitchen lights and stepped into the hallway, the house felt larger than before. Every polished surface and framed painting seemed to hold a secret she had not noticed until now. Naomi walked calmly through the front hall, past the tall windows where the rain had slowed to a light mist. She unlocked the side door used by staff and stepped outside into the cool night air. Her small sedan was parked beneath a maple tree near the service entrance. Naomi opened the driver door and placed the cleaning bag carefully on the passenger seat before starting the engine. As the car pulled slowly down the long driveway toward the iron gates of the Whitmore estate, she glanced once at the rearview mirror. The mansion stood tall and quiet behind her, its windows glowing softly against the dark sky as if nothing unusual had happened within its walls. But Naomi knew better now. Beneath that calm exterior, the truth was still waiting in the darkness, and tomorrow night would be the moment it finally began to surface. The next morning the sky above Charlotte was pale gray when Naomi Carter parked her sedan across the street from the small neighborhood market printed on the receipts. The store looked ordinary in the early daylight, a single-story brick building with a faded green sign and a few pickup trucks already parked near the entrance. Naomi sat in her car for a moment with the engine off, the black folder resting on the passenger seat beside her. The events of the night before still felt almost unreal. Yet the weight of the documents inside the folder reminded her that everything she had seen beneath the Whitmore estate was real. She picked up the folder and stepped out of the car, walking calmly across the parking lot as the automatic doors slid open. Inside, the store smelled faintly of fresh coffee and baked bread. A few early customers moved quietly between the aisles while a cashier arranged newspapers near the front counter. Naomi approached slowly and offered a polite smile. "Good morning," she said. The cashier, a middle-aged woman wearing a store apron with a name tag that read Linda, returned the greeting with a friendly nod. "Morning," Linda replied. Naomi opened the black folder and carefully removed one of the grocery receipts from the cardboard box. "I am hoping you can help me with something," she said. Linda glanced at the receipt as Naomi placed it gently on the counter. "Do you remember who bought these items?" she asked. Linda adjusted her glasses and looked closely at the paper. "Well, this was a few weeks ago," she said thoughtfully. "But we do see a lot of the same customers around here." Naomi waited quietly as the cashier studied the receipt again. After a moment, Linda's expression shifted slightly with recognition. "Yes," she said slowly. "I remember this one. The customer bought the same things several times. Naomi felt her heartbeat quicken. Do you remember what he looked like? She asked carefully. Linda nodded. Tall man. Well-dressed. He usually came in the evening and paid with a credit card. Naomi exchanged a glance with the folder in her hands before asking the next question. Do you have security cameras here? Linda smiled slightly and pointed toward a small black dome mounted in the corner of the ceiling. Of course, she said. Every register is recorded. Naomi felt a quiet sense of relief move through her chest. Would it be possible to check the footage from the date on that receipt? She asked. Linda looked at the receipt again, then back at Naomi. We would need the store manager for that, she explained. But he will be here in about 10 minutes. Naomi nodded gratefully. She stepped aside to wait near the front windows while the early morning sun slowly brightened the parking lot outside. In her hands, the black folder felt heavier than ever, because somewhere inside the camera system of this small neighborhood market was the moment that could confirm the truth Alexander Whitmore had been waiting months to reveal. Naomi Carter sat quietly in the small office at the back of the neighborhood market while the store manager leaned over the security computer beside her. The monitor glowed softly in the dim room as lines of recorded footage appeared across the screen, each labeled with dates and timestamps from the past several months. Naomi held the black folder on her lap, her hands resting gently on top of it as she watched the manager scroll through the system. You said the date was right here, the manager said, glancing at the receipt Naomi had shown him earlier. Naomi nodded. Yes, that one, she replied calmly. The manager clicked the file and the footage began to play. The view showed the front checkout area of the store, the same counter where Naomi had stood only a short time earlier. Customers passed through the frame carrying grocery baskets and paper bags while the timestamp in the corner slowly moved forward. Naomi watched carefully, her eyes fixed on the screen. Several minutes passed before the door opened again and a tall figure stepped inside the store. Naomi leaned forward slightly. Even from the grainy security camera image, the man was easy to recognize. He wore a dark suit and moved with the quiet confidence of someone used to being in charge of every room he entered. The manager paused the video and pointed at the screen. That is the customer I remember, he said. Naomi felt a quiet confirmation settle in her chest as she looked at the familiar face. Ethan Whitmore stepped up to the register carrying bottled water, canned soup, and bread, the exact items listed on the receipt. The timestamp matched the date printed on the paper in Naomi's folder. The manager played the video again. Ethan Whitmore paid for the items, took the bag, and left the store. Naomi sat back slowly as the video ended. The room was silent for a moment before the manager spoke again. Would you like me to copy that footage for you? He asked. Naomi nodded. Yes, please, she said quietly. A few minutes later, the manager handed her a small flash drive containing the video file. Naomi placed it carefully inside the black folder beside the receipts and documents before standing up. Thank you for your help, she said sincerely. The manager gave a friendly nod as she walked back through the store and out into the bright morning sunlight. Naomi sat in her car for a moment after closing the door, the folder resting securely on the passenger seat beside her. Inside it were the documents, the receipts, and now the video that connected everything together. The quiet truth hidden beneath the Whitmore estate finally had proof that could not be ignored. As Naomi started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, she knew the next time she returned to the mansion that evening, the silence beneath the house would not last much longer.